The World's Greatest Elephant by Ralph Helfer and illustrated by Ted Lewin. Long ago, on a farm near the little town of Zezeldorf, Germany, a child and an elephant were born at precisely the same hour as the old church clock struck midnight. "I will name my beautiful son Brom," said the elephant trainer Joseph as he held the newborn child. "And as for this wonderful baby," a smile crossed Joseph's face, "we'll name her Modoc. I can only hope these two will always be together." And indeed, from that day on, Brom and Modoc were inseparable. They shared the same bottle as best they could and chased each other helter-skelter through the hay. As they grew older, they accompanied Brom's father to the circus. The Wunder Circus was a small German circus, famous for its performing pachyderms. People came from far and wide to see them, and Joseph had trained them all. "Someday you will take my place," Joseph told little Brom, "and the whole world will applaud you and Modoc." The years flew. When Brom and Modoc turned 5 years old, Mosey, as Brom called her, weighed 2,000 pounds, and when they were 10, she weighed 4,000, while Brom barely tipped the scale at 40. Mosey was the biggest elephant in the circus, bigger even than her mother, and soon Joseph put her and Brom into his act. The crowds went mad with excitement when Brom stood towering on top of Modoc's head. At night, staring into Mosey's eyes, Brom sometimes thought that he and the elephant could read each other's thoughts. "We'll never be separated," he promised his friend, "no matter what happens." But not long after that, the tents of the Wunder Circus were abuzz. The circus had been sold. The new owner, a stout, pompous man named Jay North, spoke to the worried employees of the Wunder Circus. "The circus will be moving to New York," he said to the crowd. "You will no longer be needed." Brom went to the new owner the next day and begged Mr. North to keep him on as Modoc's trainer. But Mr. North refused to listen. "That's a man's job. Can't have a kid like you trying to fill a man's shoes. Now get, or I'll call security." Brom was dismayed. His father was very ill now, and it was his last wish to see Mosey and Brom go to New York together. That night, he told his father a white lie. "Mr. North promised he would think about it," he said. Joseph died the next day and was buried in the old Grenchen Hill Cemetery. All the circus people went to pay their respects. The calliope and its oompapa music echoed down into the valley. Brom rode Modoc down to join them at the gravesite. With her trunk, Modoc gently lifted a wreath from around her neck and placed it on the grave. Brom had lost his father, and he was determined not to lose his best friend as well. With the help of a sailor friend, he hatched a daring plan. He would stow away on the boat that was taking Modoc to New York. Once they got there in America, perhaps he could get a job as a roustabout, anything, to be near Mosey. So Brom hid, first in the truck, then in a packing crate full of circus equipment that was loaded onto the ship to New York. It was pitch dark in the crate and hard to breathe, but all Brom could think about was Mosey. Where was she? Was she afraid? The two of them had never been apart for this long in their lives. At last, Brom's sailor friend Jimmy appeared. Jimmy helped Brom out of the crate, brought him some food, and guided him through the dark ship to the hold where the elephants were being kept. When Modoc spotted her friend, she gave a deafening trumpet. Brom stayed in the hold with the elephants for the next few weeks, sharing the fruits and vegetables brought to them and hiding in the hay whenever the keepers came by. Then one day, Brom noticed it was difficult to stand up without holding on to something. Even the elephants were having a hard time keeping their feet. Then a message came over the ship's loudspeaker. "Attention! We are encountering high seas. No one is allowed on deck unless ordered." At first, Brom wasn't worried. How could a ship as big as this one sink? But as the hours passed, the ship began to roll more and more violently. A trickle of water made its way down to the hold. Soon the trickle became a small river. The elephants were growing nervous. Brom went to Mosey. "It's okay, girl," he murmured. Then he looked around. Mo and the other elephants were chained to the hold. But Brom had seen the keepers unlock them to clean the area. He knew where the keys were kept. Hurriedly, he found them and began to set his friends free. At last, he went to unlock the chains that held Modoc. The water was so deep now that the locks were submerged. Brom fumbled with the keys and dropped them in the swirling water. With both hands he searched, but the waves had kept the keys away. Modoc strained against her chains, but they were so heavy and thick even she couldn't break them. Just then, a heavy cannon that was being stored in the hold broke loose and rolled across the floor, smashing through the hull of the ship. The angry ocean rushed in, pulling everything in its grasp back out through the hole. Brom clung to Mosey, and she felt her pull with all her strength, and the chain snapped. Boy and elephant were sucked into a swirling cold void, tumbling into darkness. There was no up or down, nothing to hold on to. Then, air! Brom gasped it gratefully. He looked around. He was floating on the surface of the ocean amidst pieces of wreckage. Alone. "Modoc," he called. "Mo!" Had she drowned? Then he heard a voice. "Hello, over here." Brom swam toward the sound. As he got closer, he saw a group of survivors from the ship clinging together, trying to stay afloat. One of them, to his relief, was Jimmy. Brom gasped out the terrible story of Mosey's loss. He didn't know how long they'd been able to survive in the open water, but without Mo, he wasn't sure he cared. And then he heard a familiar sound. The trumpet of an elephant. Then it came again, and then louder, closer. Everyone could hear it. Brom peered into the early morning gloom and saw a huge dark shadow in the distance. "Mosey!" he screamed as the shadow drew closer. Swept by the current, she almost passed right by them, but the men formed a line in the water, and Brom, at the end of it, stretched his hand out as far as he could. "Mosey, trunk!" he called, and the elephant extended her trunk until Brom brushed the tip of it and then grabbed on. Everyone circled around her, holding on. Modoc was like a floating island. For 2 days they floated. Elephants are great swimmers, and they can float for as long as they can keep their trunks above water. The men made their shirts into ropes and laid them over Mosey's back, then tied themselves to the ropes. They were thirsty and hungry and afraid, but determined to survive. Finally, a tugboat appeared in the fog. They were saved! One by one, the tugboat's crew helped the survivors on board. Jimmy, the next to last, held his hand out to Brom. "Come on, lad, let's go." "But what about Mo, Jimmy?" "We'll have to come back for her, son." But Brom refused to leave his friend. He could see the tugboat was too small for Modoc to board. Jimmy turned to the ship's captain. "This elephant saved all of our lives. We have to help her." The captain shrugged. "We must go. A new storm is brewing." "You go on, Jimmy," Brom called. "No, Brom, no," Jimmy cried. "Safe journey," Brom shouted. As the tugboat started to move away, Brom and Modoc drifted into the fog and were gone. Brom lost count of the days as he and Modoc floated alone. He was sure that the captain of the tugboat would radio to another ship, but would Mosey's strength last long enough for them to see it in time? Her trunk began to sag beneath the water. Brom tried to hold it up so she could breathe, but it was too heavy. Holding tight to his friend, Brom whispered to her, "Mosey girl, it's time to go. Don't be afraid." With her trunk firmly wrapped around his arm, they began to sink into the waves. This was part 1 of the story. Stay tuned for part 2 next time.